Magic reveals itself to those who remember where to look for it. This is Magic Hour, and I'm your host, Taylor Page. Welcome back to Magic Hour, my loves. Taylor Page here.
And I'm Claire. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.
I'm so excited for our conversation with Julie Ryan today. She's a medical intuitive, which is something we've never really gotten into on the pod. And it feels very synchronistic. And it's always so funny because the way that I get the guests is a very hodgepodge way. It's like people find us, people come across my path. In this case, I was a guest on Julie's podcast and now she's coming on mine. It's like such an interesting way. I'm not thinking about the astrology and picking the guests, but somehow the timing of everything works out in this way. And this episode feels so synchronistic to me with us beginning our Mars retrograde cycle, because Mars rules our energy levels, how we go after what we want, and in a lot of ways, our physical body. And so I feel like this is a time period where we're collectively assessing how much energy do I really have? Are my energetic strategies working smarter, not harder? Am I hitting a burnout moment? What is my body whispering to me so it doesn't have to scream? It's like right now is this reconsideration of our energetic strategies. And if we feel like we're hitting a plateau or we're not moving forward, there's, of course, thinking about a new strategy from a mental strategic perspective. But there's also just the plain looking at, is our cup full on a body level? And how can we take care of our physical body in a way that our head isn't trying to force us to, but that our body is actually asking for?
Yeah, this is something I've been thinking about a lot because I just want to be in a practice where I'm really caring for my body more and in a better way and really listening to what my body needs. And I think something that's helped me on my journey with it is yoga, just because I think for so long, I didn't even realize that I was feeling like detached from my body. Like I was just living in my head and not having an experience of wholeness with the rest of my body. And I think yoga helped me to connect the two, which is so funny to think that they're not connected. Like somehow we're a head and a body, like not an entire entity. But I think a lot of us walk around like that. And so even just a first step of like connecting to your breath and feeling into your body and what it's calling for is like a huge step forward.
I could not agree more. And living in our head, it's almost impossible not to do that in this society. That's like the default. Our brain was not designed to consume the amount of information that we consume. And so connecting to our breath, mind-body practices like yoga and Tai Chi, getting into nature, sitting in silence. But for me, it's been really interesting because I, am on the other side of kind of an intense like COVID menstrual cycle, autoimmune flare. And I really love Pilates and yoga and walking and working out. And I'm in general a pretty active person. And I have just been listening to my body so hard. It's like, no, I am not ready to go back to that energetic output. And my head is like, but you need to do these things. It's on your list. And I'm like, forget the list, forget the pressure that I'm trying to put on myself. I'm listening intuitively to what my body needs to fill back up the cup so that I can do the things that I love. And it kind of reminds me of this client that I have who's also a friend, and her angels were kind of giving her a similar message to the one that my body's giving me right now. It's like she was kind of pushing herself to be overactive from a place of almost trying to punish her body or to force her body to look a certain way that she thought she had to. And she got a terrible back injury. I gave her a reading and they were like, stop, like, please stop, like, please rest, please be kinder to yourself. And then like maybe a month later, she got this horrible back injury and had to move home and is in constant pain and has to get all these operations. It's like all of these things are happening. And so sometimes I think when we talk about living from the head, it's like this militant thing, like we should be doing this, we should be doing that. And I think it's so important to honor the capacity that our physical body actually has and to be okay with that. And I think this is such a layered topic because it's rooted in so much like collective pain for women, like our pain body. And, a lot of us attach our worth to how our physical body looks. So there's so many layers to that. But I think at the very, very root first step is just listening to what our body asks and loving ourselves enough to trust it.
Yes, absolutely. Recognizing that we're all individuals and that our bodies are also individual. So, what might work for one person's body doesn't mean it's right for our body. I was talking to a friend who really loves this certain type of exercise, and he was like, it's the best, it's the way. And I was like, that's so great for you. And I had tried it and I liked it, but it was too intense for me. And now I've found a modality I really like, reformer Pilates.
Me too.
Yeah, it's so great. And I think it's something that's great for females often, but not just females. It's been something that's worked for me because it feels like I've had a similar thing to what you were speaking to about your client, where it's I know that exercise and moving my body makes me feel good. But I also have recognized now that if I push too hard, I do myself a disservice and I hurt my back. And then I can't be physical and exercise. So I really have to listen to my body, like you were saying, and hear what is right for it and not project onto it what other people say is right for them. And we can only do that by listening to it and ourselves.
It's so true. And what was coming through as you were speaking too is that we are part of a society where the research isn't done on what's good for women and women's health. That's why it's more imperative than ever to listen intuitively to what our body is asking for and what feels good. Because high intensity interval training, that's maybe good for men and their hormone cycle and their bodies, and intermittent fasting might be best for men, maybe women through different phases of their cycle or their body, but we're so different and we're so individual. We all have our own unique body profiles, and we really have to honor that and become our own source. Let your body be your health expert. Really tune into what it's asking for. And I've been on such a health journey in my life. It's been a real factor for me, has been PCOS and really intense periods. And it's been really interesting on this journey to also bring in the emotional and soul aspect of the healing, because I talk about this in my Healing the Witch Wound workshop about how 80% of autoimmune and chronic illnesses in the United States are women. And I talk about why that is and how it's connected to the witch wound and all of those things. And for me personally, I think that chronic illness is an invitation for deeper healing and stepping into personal power. And it's our body getting our attention. And so this isn't to go into the place that sometimes the spiritual world can go of victim shaming. I'm not talking about a baby that was born with a heart problem or somebody who's had these health tragedies in their life. I'm not saying the purpose of that is for you to learn this lesson. Maybe a lesson will be a silver lining in that situation, but I don't like that vein of thinking. But I think if you kind of have low grade persistent symptoms, it is your body getting your attention. And that was certainly the case for me with my period pains. And for me, it was really woven into epigenetics and pain passed down from women in my lineage who accepted a lot less from men than they should have. And the sort of stress of that and always being in survival mode, I was low grade in survival mode around masculine relationships for so much of my life that my body was in fight or flight, and there was inflammation and there was stress, and that fed those symptoms. And so one of the most powerful experiences in my healing journey, aside from my diet and supplements and taking care of myself and moving intuitively and eating intuitively, was the mind-body heart connection. And in particular, there is a male relative that I've had a really difficult dynamic with. And for my entire life, I would be the bigger person. I would walk on eggshells around this person. I would light myself on fire to keep this person warm and to keep the peace. I was indoctrinated into a system of behavior with this person. Like they say, the family can sometimes adapt to the most difficult member in it. And I was doing the dance of adaptation to that person's weaponized big emotions. And I recreated that dynamic in a romantic relationship And I was in that romantic relationship. My periods were like worse than ever. They were like, it wasn't a whisper, it was a scream. And so finally, it was last year on the summer solstice, actually. So witchy. I confronted this person. This person basically reached out to me, wanted me to bend over backwards and walk on eggshells and accommodate their demands. And I said no. And I said, and this is why. And I spoke my truth and I held my ground in a way that felt so scary for my nervous system because I knew other relatives were going to pressure me and push me and see me as the villain. And I still did it because I loved myself more than any of that. And my period came later that day. And it was the first one I've ever had in my life without cramps. I didn't even have to take a single Advil because I was so regulated in my nervous system. My inner child, especially after my mom passed, like my mom was the person that always got me and stuck up for me in the family. And now it was like me on an island with people who all thought differently than me. And even in the midst of that, I stood my ground. And the way that my body has healed and my periods have healed since that has been nothing short of a miracle. And I'm saying I have tried everything. My entire life has been around designing a life that I can live with this chronic pain, literally working for myself. When I wanted to be a comedy writer, part of the reason that never worked out for me is because I could never take a writer's assistant job. It's like 5 days a week, 12-hour days. Like I couldn't reliably show up for that because once a week I would need to rest. And so like this has informed my life in such a big way. And there's still more to unpack, but just the way that our body can heal when we stand in our power and have our own back, and our inner child feels like no matter what, I'll be okay because bigger me will stand up for what we need. It's so profound.
Wow. That is incredible, Taylor. And I'm just so proud of you and inspired by you for taking that step, because I know that is just a really tough thing to do, especially with family. And it's hard not to listen to everyone else's opinions. But I know that you listened to yourself in that moment and did what was right for you. And it's so beautiful to see that your body responded in a way of affirmation of that. It showed you that, yes, taking care of you matters. And there's a lot of studies around this now and a lot of scientific data around that. We already know that like stress causes disease. Like they know that that is a fact, and that stress in our body can amplify or create disease. And so it then also leads to say that not having stress in our body, allowing our body to be calm, allowing ourselves to be soothed, creating a life where we can be at ease and we're not in fight or flight will have health benefits for us as well. So the ramifications of choosing ourselves and choosing our own peace are bigger than I think we can even fully grasp. And I think your story is such a perfect example of that. And it's a daily practice, I'm sure, to continue to stay in that power and stay in that peace. And the more you do it, I'm sure the easier it gets. And having your body respond in such an affirming way is just like such a big piece of that. So thank you for sharing all that with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. And the message that I got from my guides was that this was an essential cycle I had to break before my motherhood journey, was feeling safe to create boundaries with family and to disagree. And that's a big part of why it was showing up in my ovaries for me. And like that, even the energetic shift of this is affecting my fertility and also like preparing me on a mind, body, soul level for the motherhood journey. So that has been really powerful as well. And it kind of reminds me of that one listener question episode where they were talking about healing from really intense capital T trauma and moving forward, and how it was so hard for them to really believe that the universe could actually support them after what they had gone through. And I think healing from body pain, because pain can take you to such dark places mentally as well. And I think when you're sick, you can really believe that it will last forever. That was the case for me when I thought I was going to lose my eye. I really thought I was going to lose my eye and that it would last forever. And it was a very intense time period, like right in my Saturn return. And I think that fear is the best liar in the world. But I also think that with healing, it's not just enough to take medicine, to go to the doctor, to fix your diet, to exercise. Like that's a very important part of healing. But I think that you can't heal your physical body if your mind is still sick, if your spirit is still sick. It's like there's also healing on the mental, soul, inner child level. That is an essential part of healing that goes hand in hand with physical healing. And I think that's what we miss. We think of them on these islands. Like I'm doing this spiritual work on myself, but I'm also working on my healing journey. It's like, no, they're actually together because emotional wounds will eventually turn into physical wounds. Physical wounds can translate to low mental health and mental wounds. It's all part of a system that works together. And you'll see that like everything is a messenger showing you where to heal.
Yeah, it just goes back to that idea too of like, we're not separate entities. We are one being, and all facets of ourself affect the other facets of ourself. And so what we're telling ourselves in our mind or what our heart is feeling is sending messages through our whole body. You know, if we're feeling, oh no, oh no, oh no, our whole body is hearing that message. And if we're hearing, you know, peace and safety, our body feels that. And, you know, even thinking about it as like, if I'm in a space and I feel safe, I'm going to be a more expanded, free version of myself. I'm going to take more chances. I'm going to try things versus if I'm feeling scared, I'm going to hide. I'm going to protect myself. And I think on a cellular level, that's happening as well. If we're feeling afraid, our cells feel the oh no, and they're probably contracting versus being in an expansive state when we feel safe. And, you know, I see that with my nieces. Like my nieces feel so safe because they've been so loved and so encouraged, and they are willing to take risks and play and be big. They're not worried about, they're just not worried. And it's such a great lesson for us in this life. And of course, it's going to positively affect every part of us.
Yeah, I love that so much. And the last thing I'll say before we introduce our guest is this message I've shared before that healthy cannot coexist with sick. Either the sick will become healthy because that's where you're putting your energy and focus and attention, or the healthy will become sick and drag down to that level. And I think the last part of this like energetic healing layer is creating boundaries with people who are in that sick consciousness, because that was really what I had to do. And it's like we can be on our own mind, body, soul journey, but if we don't have boundaries with people who are in abusive patterns of behavior, then that's going to keep dragging us back. It's going to keep like pouring poison in the wound. So I think as we talk about our own mind, body, soul journey, also boundaries with outside people and situations and dynamics that are toxic are so important too.
Yes, and that can be really hard to do. But, you know, your story is really inspiring because it shows that even though that's scary and even though it's hard, and I know you continue to be on a journey with it, it benefits you and allows you to show up for everyone in your life in a more positive way when we set those boundaries and when we don't allow that poison in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm so excited to get into this conversation with Julie because she is just a wealth of knowledge. And I really enjoyed this talk, and I know you guys will too. Julie Ryan is a psychic medium and medical intuitive, and she can sense what medical conditions and illnesses a person has and facilitate energetic healings. She can communicate with spirits both alive and dead. Julie is a quote buffet of psychicness and can scan animals, access people's past lives, and she can tell how close to death someone is. Her book, Angelic Attendants: What Really Happens as We Transition from This Life into the Next, describes a series of events that involve angels, multitudes of deceased family and friends. Each week, Julie scans callers on her Ask Julie Ryan show, which is heard in over 100 countries throughout the world. Julie is a businesswoman, an inventor, author, podcaster, and a serial entrepreneur. Her surgical device inventions are sold globally, and she has founded 9 companies in 5 different industries. Welcome, Julie Ryan. Julie, welcome to Magic Hour. We're so excited to have you on today.
Oh, my honor. Thanks for the invitation.
Yes. So this is so exciting because we are doing a little podcast swap. I got to be on your podcast and now I get to interview you on mine. And we always start off Magic Hour by asking, what is your big three, your sun, moon, and rising?
Say more.
In astrology, your sun sign, your moon sign, and your rising sign.
Taurus sun rising.
Okay, awesome. So you're a Taurus sun. That makes sense because you're a medical intuitive and Taurus rules the body. So that's already very interesting. And then the second question that we ask is, how does your intuition speak to you?
Oh gosh, I see things in my mind's eye. I get information downloaded into my head. I call that divine downloads. I feel things, I hear things, I smell things. So I guess through all of the modalities, but I'm a visual learner, Taylor. So that's probably it's not probably, that is my primary way that I get information from spirit.
Yeah, so super clairvoyant. I love that. And just a question as somebody who's so advanced in your clairvoyance. Clairvoyance was not my first clair, it was actually my third. And when I experience clairvoyance, I experience it as a quick flash. And I'm wondering, as clairvoyance is your primary clair and as you're so developed in it, how does that change as you develop? Like, can you sit with the visions for a little bit longer? Can you zoom in on the details? Or is it still a quick flash, even years into the development of it?
No, it's like I'm watching a movie in my head. It's like I have a big screen TV in my head and I'm watching a movie. Sometimes I see pictures of things or images of things, but normally it will be very pronounced and I can get very specific. Like if I'm scanning somebody who's having surgery anywhere in the world, I can see what's going on in the operating room. I can read the anesthesia equipment. I can tell you how many surgeons are in the room. I can see the spirits of deceased loved ones in the room, how the patient's guardian angel is over the head of anesthesia. I can describe what the people's spirits look like. So yeah, it's more like a movie.
That is so cool. And it's so interesting how, as we develop, our clairs can sort of breathe more and give us so much more detail and insight. Like for me, when clairvoyance came online, it looked like I blinked into a camera flash and I saw shapes of light. That's how it started. And then it turned into flashes of pictures. And now I can kind of start to get maybe more fleshed out things. But for me, feeling and knowing, like feeling, I can just, that's my bread and butter. That's the clair that I don't get as a flash. It's like a constant stream of information. So it's just really inspiring to see where clairvoyance can go to.
Yeah. And I forgot about the knowing stuff. I call that divine downloads, where you just know stuff and feelings. A lot of times I'll get goosebumps or chill bumps, whatever you want to call them, on things. I don't necessarily feel pain. I can feel emotion, but some medical intuitives will feel like gallbladder pain. I don't see that. I don't feel that. Rather, I will see an inflamed gallbladder or a diseased gallbladder in my mind's eye. So I don't. Do you get that? Like if you're scanning somebody with a medical thing, you get a pain in your left knee or something?
Absolutely. And it's been that way since the beginning. Like I can feel the tumor in their left breast. Like that is how it is for me. I just feel I'm such a feeler.
Yeah. Whereas I'll see it and I can tell you whether it's malignant or not based on what I'm seeing.
And that's the interesting thing because I consider you obviously a master psychic medium, especially like a master in clairvoyance. Like you said, it's your primary clair. So it's just so interesting to pick your brain about that. And I would consider myself, a master in clair empathy, clair sentience, because it started as like little flashes of a yes or a no in my body. But now it's so sophisticated that I can feel where the Alzheimer's is infecting the cognitive decline of their brain. Like it just gets so advanced and it's so cool how clairs do that.
Well, so I'll see the scar tissue in the brain, and then I'll see the neural pathways being blocked by scar tissue. And then we can remove the scar tissue energetically and regenerate brain matter. And then I'll watch those neural pathways light up. And then I'll also get information that's downloaded. For instance, I have a client actually who's also a graduate of my class, and the whole left side of his head had lots of scar tissue. So I could tell there was a directional blast or fall or, he was in a car accident or something based on what I was seeing. And I said, but there was an explosion. Where was the explosion? So that was downloaded into my head that there was an explosion. I didn't see it. And he said, yeah, I was in Iraq and there was a bomb that exploded on the base. And it exploded on that side of his head. So I could see that although he wasn't injured in the bombing, the frequency of those explosive waves caused injury to his brain.
That is so interesting.
Yeah, it was fascinating.
And that's just a perfect example for the people who are developing their intuition, who are listening, that all of our clairs work together. So she had an image, she had a knowing, and it all feeds each other to make a complete picture. So I want to rewind a little bit to how you sort of got into this path as a medical intuitive, how you knew that that was meant to be your specialty, your natural gifts in it. I just think it's so fascinating because you're the only medical intuitive that I know.
Well, I don't think I have any gifts. It's all learned. I learned how to do all this stuff. I was in the medical industry for over 30 years as an inventor of surgical devices and manufacturer and distributor of those devices. And so I was interested in healing stuff. And I got a book from a friend called Anatomy of the Spirit by Carolyn Mace, who called herself a medical intuitive. And I thought, well, what's that mean? I never heard that term before. And I looked it up and I read her book and then I wanted to know more. And this was 30 years ago, Taylor. So it was a situation where we didn't have the internet yet. And I went to a bookstore, went to a Barnes and Noble to see what else was out there. And I found a book called Hands of Light by Barbara Brennan, who was a former NASA physicist who parlayed very complex quantum physics principles into understandable English for the non-scientific mind. That would be me. And so I read her book and I wanted to know more. So I called her school and I said, you guys got anybody teaching this stuff in my area? And they said, yeah, we have a graduate who just opened a school. I said, cool. And so I studied with her for 6 years. And then fast forward, here I am doing this now full time. Back then, people said to me, family and friends said, why are you doing this? And I said, I don't know. They said, what are you going to do with it? I said, again, I have no idea. And what I learned was, and I know you have had the same experience and continue to, once you connect with spirit, you can do it all. I say I'm a buffet of psychicness. Talk to your dead grandma. I can scan your cat. We can look at your liver. We can tell how close to death somebody is. We can do past life stuff. We can communicate with spirits, both alive and deceased. It doesn't matter because once you connect with spirit, then you can do it all.
It's so true.
Right. And people call into my show on Thursday nights, Ask Julie Ryan at 8 Eastern, and we're calling from all over the world. We're talking to a deceased loved one. I'm scanning them medically. We're talking about their pet. We're doing all kinds of things. And I'll do the same thing with clients. Whatever we can cram into an hour, however many categories they want to cover, it doesn't matter to me. It's all fun.
Absolutely. And I love your story so much, because as I interview professional intuitives in the space, there's always commonalities. And one of them is this idea of, I have no idea where this is taking me. I didn't even know this was an option. I just feel called to do it and I'm going to trust that path. So I think that's so beautiful. And the other thing that really struck me is your background in medical device sales. And that's really interesting because spirit needs all different types of people with different backgrounds, because you already speak the language of healing and the body, and spirit works through our knowledge bases. Like me as an astrologer, they show me astrological archetypes because they know I speak that language. And so for you, it makes so much sense as a medical intuitive that you already had that knowledge. And for people who are developing mediums, I know a lot of them study different parts of the body and different things so that spirit can speak to them and they'll know the language. So I just think that that's really interesting that you are already on that path, and how no experience is wasted because it gave you the background knowledge to understand what spirit was highlighting for you.
Well, and I'm a serial entrepreneur too. I've founded 9 companies in 5 industries in 30 years. And this is the first thing I've ever done without a business plan. We were talking about that when you were on my show, and it was like, we're being led. And it's very different for me. Furthermore, when I really dipped my toe in this, it was to help people when they have a loved one at the end of their lives and tell how close to transition that person is, and to be able to communicate with that person and talk about the deceased loved ones and angel spirits and pet spirits that are around the person. So the medical was not what drew me into this. I mean, it drew me into learning about it, but as far as starting to do this as a profession, it was teaching people what happens when somebody dies. But back to your point earlier, spirit always has a master plan that sometimes we're not aware of it. Dinner conversation of what's happening when somebody's dying is not as feasible as, I have this ache and pain. Can you help me figure out what it is? So that's where we start the conversation. And oh, by the way, my grandmother's at the end of her life. Can you help us communicate with her? And so it's been quite a journey and continues to unfold in ways that there's no way that I can imagine. And I know you're going through the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting because as you were talking, that perfectly describes the Taurus Scorpio polarity. So as a Taurus sun, I would be curious if you have some Scorpio placements too. I'll have to look at your birth chart another time.
I'd love that. I'm on the cusp. My birthday is the 20th.
Even in astrology, though, cusps don't technically exist. You would be either the last degree of Taurus or the first degree of Gemini, and both have a significant meaning with those degrees. So Taurus is literally the sign of life in a physical body and enjoying life in a physical body. And its sister sign Scorpio is death and mediumship. That's what I am. I'm a Scorpio.
I never heard that.
Yeah.
Cool.
And so what you're describing, it's like the Taurus has to come first, like warming them up with the physical body and the life. And then eventually you can get to the death, the ending, the transition. So I find that to be synchronistic. And I'm wondering, before you embarked on this path, what was that thing that made you really feel called to it? Were you already sort of getting intuitive hits? Like, how did you feel led to this path?
No, I wasn't. Although the only thing that comes to mind is when the bombing happened in Oklahoma City I guess it was in the 90s, the early 90s. One of my best friends from childhood lived there. I was living in Los Angeles at the time. So we were 2 hours behind Oklahoma City time on Central Time. I had the news on. I was getting ready to go to a meeting. I was getting dressed and the news was on and they were talking about the bombing. It just happened. And I knew my BFF Patty was injured. And so I called her cell phone. She didn't pick up. I called her husband's cell phone. He didn't pick up. Called their house, talked to the nanny. She said, I haven't heard from either one of them. And I was panicked at this point. So I ran downstairs and I told my husband, I said, there's been a bombing in Oklahoma and Patty's been hurt. She's been hurt. And he said, well, have you talked to her? And I said, no. And he said, well, how do you know she's been hurt? I said, I just know. And he said, I think you're nuts. I think you're overreacting. And sure enough, she'd been injured and survived. Thank you, God. But that's the only thing that comes to mind, Taylor, of anything that I knew about. I really didn't know anything about this woo-woo space. I was raised Catholic, so I knew about angels and saints and the Holy Spirit and that kind of stuff, which I think gives people a really great foundation as a springboard to launch into the more spiritual stuff. But no, I couldn't see dead people. I wasn't doing any of this stuff before my mid-30s.
So you were more just inspired by the idea of healing and helping people energetically when you read Carolyn Miss's book.
And then Barbara Brennan's. Barbara Brennan especially. Carolyn May lit the fire, and then Barbara Brennan really fanned the flames.
That's so cool. I want to speak a little bit about the connection that you find with emotional wounds and physical wounds, because I think this is where science is hopefully going to catch up to soon, this mind-body connection. And I'm wondering what comes up for you in readings with that.
Well, I'm like a human MRI. So I'll connect with somebody and then I can see inside their body telepathically. Like I can see broken bones, torn ligaments, viral infections, bacterial infections, cancer, whatever. And then I watch energetic healings. So it's spirit working through me and with me, like it's spirit working through you and with you to help the person heal, because nobody heals anybody else. No doctor, no shaman, no energy healer. We all help the person heal themselves. So there is always an emotional component in place before any kind of disease or illness sets in. 100% of the time, in my experience, doing this with tens of thousands of people over the last 7 years or so. So I'll get them on my radar. It's like I have a big screen TV in my head. Something will be identified, they'll be healing. Something else will be identified, they'll be healing. And then the last thing that I do, which I think is the most important part of a healing, is I'm looking at what I call their energy field membrane. Now, that's the container that holds the energy that makes up our body and our spirit. And it reminds me of a really thin plastic bag. So imagine that's got the energy from the body and the spirit inside of it. When there's a tear or a hole, in other words, a breach in that container, the person's leaking energy. The spirit is the power source for the body. So when they're leaking energy, it always precedes any kind of medical condition. Now, that breach is caused by an energy block, a la Eastern medicine, acupressure, acupuncture, clear the block, get the chi to move, that whole concept. Energy blocks, in turn, are caused by an emotional event, either in this life or a past life. So I'll envision going into that terror hole, and it'll be like I'm walking into the scene of a movie, and I'll be given what the year was, a little bit about what happened. If it was from a past life, I'll be given where it was, when it was, what the situation was, and we'll correlate that with what's going on in their current life. As soon as we illuminate what caused that energy block, it eradicates it. It allows the energy field membrane to heal, allows the body to go back to working on full power, helps the body regain and maintain health. Again, I believe it's the most important part of a healing, because we can fix body parts all day long, but if you're leaking power, what's the point? Now, an analogy that I like to use to simplify this is, imagine going to the pet store to buy a goldfish. They're going to put it in a plastic bag of water in order for you to get it home. The fish represents our body. The water represents our spirit, because our body's inside our spirit. Plastic bag is the energy filled membrane. If there's a pinhole in that plastic bag and water's draining out a drop at a time, for a long time, that fish is going to be fine. However, when enough water drains out, the fish is going to be in trouble. And that's what happens to the human body.
That's so interesting. And can some of those energy leaks also be caused not only by trauma, but reoccurring ways that we give our power away, reoccurring things that kick our nervous system into fight or flight that we navigate on the day to day? Like, can those energy leaks be caused by, I know you said energetic blocks lead to those leaks. And so are those examples as well of energetic blocks, not just the super traumatic things?
Yeah, great question. It can be something very simple. It can be something dramatic. An example of something simple would be somebody called you a bad name when you were 3 and it hurt your feelings and it formed an energy block. Energy blocks, I'm going for, where did it originate? Not for what's the biggest drama and trauma. Where did it originate? Because if we can get it out from where it began, from the root, it clears out all the other pent up, stored up energy in one fell swoop. So somebody called you a bad name when you were little, and you think as an adult, well, that was no big deal. But it was a big deal to your 3-year-old little self when it happened. My favorite story about a dramatic cause for an energy block was, I have a client who lives on the Isle of Guernsey, which is one of the northern British Isles off the coast of England. And I saw her as a preteen, and there was an explosion behind her. Again, in my mind's eye, I'm watching this like I'm watching a movie. And I said to her, does that make any sense to you? And she said, yeah, I was a victim of an IRA bombing when I was 11. And I spent 3 months in the hospital. And I thought, well, that qualifies as a dramatic situation. And so it can go anywhere from simplistic to something really dramatic like that. As soon as we illuminate it, as I mentioned, Taylor, it eradicates it, allows the energy filled membrane to heal, allows the body to go back to work on full power. If somebody has repeating situations, will it cause the membrane to rupture? It could. It's usually a compilation of lots of emotional energy that's formed on top of that energy block, that little kernel of popcorn. And then eventually it causes enough pressure, causes a blowout in the membrane. It's been my experience in doing this tens of thousands of times that once the membrane is healed, it does not rupture again because we eradicate. We're going for where did that block begin? Unlike psychotherapy, and there's always room for psychotherapy, they'll say, now, Taylor, we're going to talk about your life. And it'll be like peeling an onion a layer at a time. I just want to get the onion out by the root because then all that pent up energy, all that emotional energy is wiped out in one fell swoop. So it's been my experience. I've never seen an energy field membrane rupture after it's been healed. I'm not saying that it can't. I've just never seen it happen. And by the way, I didn't learn this stuff. It all came in from spirit, the energy field membrane part.
So interesting. And honestly, it makes perfect sense to me. And I think the energy blocks are almost gifts in a way because they get our attention for deeper healing. And that's part of what we're doing as souls here. So it makes sense that on a soul level, we're not meant to just coast through life without deeper self-reflection and healing and processing and learning to stand in our power. So I find that to be really interesting. Can you tell our listeners what the telltale signs are of having an energy leak?
When I get them on my radar and I see a hole or a tear in that energy filled membrane. So imagine that really thin, stretchy saran wrap, like you'd get on a, since you're a vegetarian, like you get on a tray of green peppers from the grocery store, right? And it's thinner and stretchier, the membrane feels to me than perhaps Glad wrap that's in a box in our kitchen drawers. That stuff's thicker. And so when I see that tear or hole in the energy filled membrane, I envision myself going into it. And that's when I'm shown what happened. I have thousands of stories about you're 2 years old and your mom's giving you to a man to hold and you're throwing a fit because you don't know who this man is. And well, it's your Uncle Charlie who's been deployed in the military and has just come back from being gone for a year and you're afraid of him. You're not going to remember that as a 2-year-old, but you're going to remember the stories that your family has told you over the years about, yeah, Uncle Charlie came back and you were scared to death of him as a toddler. So that's an emotional event for a toddler that is not going to necessarily register in their cognitive brain other than it was a fearful thing, but it caused an energy block. Again, I'm going for where did that block begin? It doesn't rupture as a toddler. It'll rupture later in life when enough energetic, emotional stuff gets piled on top of that initial block. That's my take on it. That's what I see when I work with clients.
Absolutely. To rephrase the question, I mean, from the client perspective, could they have as a symptom or like would they be fatigued all the time? Like, how can they tell that they have an energy leak?
If they're sick, if there's any kind of a malady, it can be something seemingly benign, like they're exhausted all the time, or it may be a disease or a really serious illness, but it always precedes any kind of medical condition, 100% of the time. Anything that's chronic, I mean, if you get a cold, that's not a big deal. But let's say you've had a sinus infection for a year, you got an energy leak, you've got some dreaded disease, you've got some kind of medical condition that's chronic that nobody seems to be able to get to the bottom line. You know, you've been to multiple doctors, gotten multiple treatment plans, and you still have the same symptoms. I would say chances are close to 100% that you got an energy leak in your energy filled membrane.
It's so interesting because in the United States, 80% of chronic illnesses are women. And I know we live under a patriarchal society that's not set up for our hormone patterns or our health. And so it's so interesting to me how it makes sense that a lot of women would have an energy leak, including myself. I have an autoimmune condition. Because there's so many ways that we've been conditioned to not live in our power, to not use our voice, to light ourselves on fire to keep everyone else warm. So I just find this whole topic so fascinating. And so if you do have a chronic illness or you know for sure that you have an energy leak and you can't sit with you because there's only one of you, what do you recommend for people on a spiritual level to help themselves?
Well, I have graduates that a lot of my clients, if they, don't want to wait to talk to me, they can talk to one of my graduates. That's pretty much, I don't know anybody else that's doing this with the energy filled membrane leak. So I'm going to have to ponder that some, see what we can come up with. I teach my students how to do that in my classes, how to heal that. But I have not come across anybody else that's doing this type of the energy filled membrane healing. And I equate it to if your car's broken and you take it into the mechanic and you need a new radiator, let's say, and you get a new radiator and you're all excited because you're going to get your car back and you're going to be able to drive it, but you got a dead battery. Well, you need the battery to start the car to, the fixing the radiator doesn't matter if you got a dead battery. And this is a similar situation where people have had multiple diagnoses and multiple treatments suggested, and they still have the same symptoms. And so we'll go in and we'll do that. In the meantime, we're reverse engineering those symptoms and doing those healings. Most of the time, I would say 99% of the time, the actual healing of the body parts happens first. And then the energy filled membrane is normally last. Every once in a while, I'll have somebody where I'm led to do the energy filled membrane part of the healing first.
Interesting. And it seems that in terms of the leaks and things, a lot of it seems tied to inner child work and having the inner child heard. And like you said, once a traumatic event or a block is heard, it can resolve itself. And these blocks are sort of messengers that have deeper messages for our healing. And so, of course, working with you, working with your graduates. And then I also think what everybody can do at home right here, right now, is just putting your hand on your heart space, checking in with your inner child, asking your inner child what they want you to know right now, and cultivating that deep connection with your younger self and doing your own sort of body scan, asking your body, listening to the whispers of your body so it doesn't have to scream, as I say, and starting to just listen more than speaking over your body, listening to your body. And as you feel it, as you acknowledge it, it helps to heal it. So I think that that's awesome. I want to move into the topic of cancer with you because I know you'll scan people's body and you see the tumor, and I know you can connect it back to some trauma, or not even that there has to be trauma. We also live in just a super toxic world. Like there can be so many different reasons why you get cancer, but it's just so rampant. My mom passed of cancer. My father-in-law passed of cancer. It's very rare for me to know a family that has not been touched by cancer.
I agree.
It's so awful. And I won't say it's one of my biggest fears because that's giving it too much power, but it's just such a devastating illness. The way that it just pops up sometimes is just so abrupt and just devastating. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to the energetics of cancer or any, through your tens of thousands of connections, any common themes you see around cancer.
Lifestyle. It's lifestyle 100% of the time. And it's food related, it's environment related. I had somebody recently who presented with lymphoma. It was a man, middle-aged man. And I said, "You're full of toxic chemicals. Where are the chemicals? What do you do for a living?" And he said, "I'm a English teacher for middle school." It wasn't like he was a science teacher mixing wild chemicals in his lab or something. And I said, "All right." I said, "Do you live on a golf course? Do you live near a manufacturing plant? What's going on? You're being exposed to toxic chemicals. We got to figure out where the toxic chemicals are." And he said, Taylor, he goes, I'm laughing. I mean, it's not funny, but he was like, oh my God. His brother owns a pest control business. And he said, usually a couple times a month, I'll go out and I'll do some of his calls for him. And he said, "I know those chemicals are toxic because they kill bugs and rodents." And I said, "Well, there's the commonality there. You've been exposed to toxic chemicals." And there's so many lawsuits that have been won against toxic chemical manufacturers. And they can spin it however they want. But if it's killing something, whether it be a weed or a mouse or a cockroach, it's toxic, period. And so much of it is environment. And then we go a step further, and the treatment of cancer, I think, is just so interesting when we look at that. Really, we haven't seen a change in the cure rates in over 50 years. I had a research scientist from Harvard that attended my class last month. And she's been doing all kinds of research over the last several years with high doses of vitamin C IVs with huge results. But there isn't any money in it. That whole business complex for our medical industry, especially here in America, is very formidable. And so I encourage people to really follow their intuition, follow their gut, do your own research, go to PubMed.org. There's lots of articles there that aren't published in the journals, and they're different because doctors have basically the tricks in their bag are their prescription pad and a knife. Basically, they're going to cut it or put chemicals on it, or they're going to radiate it. And those studies aren't great. There's a research scientist at Boston College. I don't know if you're familiar with him, Taylor. His name's Thomas Seyfried. And he says that cancer uses glucose and or fermentation to spread. So you take those two food sources away from it and it can't spread. I've also read that it has to do with oxygen. I think as you give it extra oxygen, it can't survive because cancer patients a lot of times will go into a hyperbaric chamber. This research is all over the place. It's just not published because it goes against, the industrial complex for medical stuff. But we're really in control of a lot of it. The research is showing that so much of cancer is supposedly genetics. And then there are researchers that say, no, it's not. It's even if you've got a genetic component, it's maybe 3% of the equation, and it's lifestyle factors. It's epigenetics that turn on that gene. I watch DNA healings all the time with cancer patients in my mind's eye, and I watch the strands of DNA get resequenced back to a normal recipe. We do that a lot, do a lot of lymph cleansing, do a lot of heavy metal detox. Those are all components that I use with cancer patients. And I think the most important thing is there's a foundation called the Radical Remission Project. And it's people who have been cancer-free for 10 years who were sent home to die. And there's a woman who did research and she went around the world. I believe her name's Dr. Kelly Turner. And she wrote the book Radical Remission. And she talked to people who were sent home to die, and they were able to heal from the cancer on their own. And they're up walking around telling the tale cancer-free 10 years later. And so she came up with I believe it's the 10 or 12 common denominators. They suggest, I suggest that to every one of my clients that is diagnosed with cancer, you want to read this Radical Remission book.
That's so interesting. And as you were speaking, I just got filled with a sense of hope for the future because I think the information is out there. And especially in this Pluto and Aquarius time, like of technology and medicine and power to the people, I think this knowledge, because so many doctors, I think, have maybe not cured cancer, but made huge leaps and bounds, and they get silenced, they get pushed down, they get taken out. You can't stop knowledge and progress forever, and things are changing. So I feel a lot of hope around that. I also saw something about soursop leaves and cancer. Have you ever heard about that? This is not tested or tried. This is just something I have seen where people talk about, it's like a word of mouth wives' tale, that like brewing soursop, I think, which is some type of leaf that might be indigenous to more tropical climates, brewing tea like has helped people with shrinking their tumors and things like that. I don't know, but I'm just really hopeful because cancer is kind of like the elephant in the room of our sick society. And I'm really hopeful for more and more light being shined on it. I'm wondering, has there been a story, and I'm sure there has, where you identified cancer in somebody's body that they were not aware of in a session?
Oh, yeah, many times. Many times. Yeah. And also identified that it really wasn't cancer, like they were diagnosed. There's a woman with whom I've worked many times who had these lesions in her lungs. And the doctors said, you got lung cancer and it's advanced. We need to start you on massive doses of chemo right away. And she called me and I said, no, you don't. she had a fungal infection in her lungs. And turns out she had just returned from an African safari. And she said we were in open Jeeps, running around the plains and all that dust and stuff that I breathed in. She said she'd had a cough since she returned. And she went to the doctor and they said, oh my goodness, it looks like you have lung cancer. And so they sent her down the black hole of, this scan, that scan. I said, you have what's called valley fever. And so she did some research on it. I said, you need to get them to give you an antifungal before you agree to do anything else. And guess what? She didn't have lung cancer, and the antifungal got rid of the fungal infection in her lungs. So it goes both ways. Cancer, when I see it in my mind's eye, when I'm scanning somebody, Taylor, it can look brown or black, and it has a lumpy consistency to it. Think of cauliflower, like a head of cauliflower. It's not smooth. I can see tumors, in the breast, in the brain, and wherever. I watch them get encapsulated and removed. Oftentimes I'll say, okay, I'm going to check the girls. If I see something in somebody's, in a woman's breast, I said, let me check the girls. And sometimes it will be that the woman has dense breasts and they look lumpy and bumpy. And so the mammograms and stuff are showing false positives. So I say to them, just go get an ultrasound next time, because if you have a mammogram that is suspicious, they're going to send you for an ultrasound. I said, just cut to the chase. You got dense breasts. Just go do an ultrasound. And many of them have told me over the years, oh my gosh, you have saved me so much grief and heartache by just going to the ultrasound or the thermography, but ultrasounds especially, and bypassing the earlier tests. It's all about the insurance. What's the insurance approved and what's the easiest path, whether it works or not. It's said that sometimes it can take up to 20 years for new ideas to filter down into the physicians that are practicing on the street. And it's not their fault. It's just how they were educated. It's the system. They're doing what they believe is best. And it's up to us to really research this stuff. A couple of other things that can be helpful with this. There's an acronym for number needed to treat. It's called NNT, and there's one for number needed to harm. So number needed to treat is the number of people that have to take a medicine in order for it to help one person. The higher the number, the less effective the medicine. So before somebody goes on medicine, I always say, go online, put the name of the medicine in the search bar, and then put NNT at the end of it. If the number is 85, well, that's not a very effective medication. And you can read about that medication and have an intelligent discussion with your doctor and say, look, this medicine isn't very effective, although you're recommending it. Well, they go to their computer and they get a diagnosis, and then it tells them what medicine to suggest. That's how that works. Number needed to harm is the same thing. It will be for treatments, for surgeries, for things like that. Look at what that number is, because clinical studies have to be done, especially on pharmaceuticals, before the FDA and the governing bodies in other countries that are similar to our FDA will approve a medicine. I had to do clinical studies on my surgical devices before the FDA, and the FDA equivalent in other countries where we sold my devices, were there to show that it's effective and show that it's going to be safe. One last point on that is the placebo effect. Always, I would say, I think the studies I've seen are in the low 50%, 52, 54% are more effective than the medicine. So that's the belief that this medicine is helping me, even though it's a fake pill that they're running in that study. It's really interesting. A lot of this information is available. We just need to know to look for it.
That's just science proving the mind body belief reality that we already know. Going back to the idea of that diseases aren't necessarily genetic, that there might be a small component of that. I agree, because intuitively, I feel like people in similar families have similar diets, lifestyles, live in similar places, have similar health consciousness, and they just recreate the same sort of energetic conditions for those same maybe vulnerabilities in the DNA or markers, but I think that they're activated by similar lifestyle and things passed down. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. What comes to mind is a client who is a guy and he golfed every Saturday morning on a golf course on Staten Island with 5 or 6 of his buddies. They all got cancer, every one of them. And before I knew that they golfed together, I said, okay, did you guys, are you in the same neighborhood? Do you eat the same kind of food? What's going on? Do you do something together as an activity? And he said, yeah, we play golf every Saturday morning, unless there's a foot of snow on the golf course. And I said, it's the chemicals being sprayed on the grass. That was the commonality. But you're absolutely right. If somebody will grow up in a family and they're all exposed to the same environment. I had a client one time who he looked like, when I was scanning him energetically, he looked like he was charred, like somebody left him on the grill too long. And I said to him, and normally when I see that, if I see somebody that's had radiation treatment, I can see the charred body part energetically, like if it's their throat or their kidney or whatever. But this guy's whole body was charred. And I said, do you live now, or did you live near a nuclear power plant, or did you live near a missile silo? And he said, as a kid, I lived down the street from a nuclear power plant. And now I live near a missile silo out in the boonies in Nebraska. I said, you're being irradiated. I also have another client that looked like that, and she lived in Europe. And I said, okay, do you live near a nuclear power plant? What happened? And she said, no, but the day of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, tragedy, she said, we were at the beach and that radiation came across the Baltic Sea and affected those of us that were on the beach. And that was 40 years ago or
Wow.
more. And I could still see it in her energy field. I always say, Taylor, I can't make this stuff up. I'm not that creative. But yeah, I have thousands of stories like that.
So interesting. And I think it's a very hopeful idea that just because we come from a family that has a particular illness or condition in it, it doesn't mean that we're destined to have it too. Like, hear what we're saying, that you can make different lifestyle choices. You can protect yourself from different chemicals to the best of your ability. You can have a better diet. It's like our health is really in our hands. And I come from a family with a lot of different illnesses in it. And my dad would always tell me growing up, you'll probably have this and you'll probably have that. And that mindset is so toxic in itself because, like we're saying, there's such a mind-body connection. And so if you truly believe from a knowing place deep in your heart that you have the potential to be healthy and live a healthy life, that goes so far. That goes farther in your healing process than you might recognize.
Everything's healable. And your point about the mind body connection, I like to use the analogy of, imagine you're watching an animated movie like Frozen 2. I love Frozen 2. I think I've seen it 6 times. It's fabulous. And the first time I watch it, every time I watch it, I cry at the sad parts. And then I say to myself, Ryan, really get a grip. It's an animated movie that's pretend. It's a story that's made up, and it's not even real people. It's animated, and you're crying over this. So what's that tell us? My brain is showing my body something in the form of that movie, and my body's reacting. So your brain can show your body things to be afraid of, which causes stress. And what's the number one cause of disease and illness? Inflammation. Well, when you're inflamed, your body releases cortisol, releases norepinephrine, releases insulin, all those things. So when we can change our perspective on something, change what you're thinking, we're always in control of our thoughts because thoughts don't have a meaning until we give them a meaning. So change what you're thinking, change it to something that feels better or good. You're in a higher vibration. That helps nurture your cells and keep you healthy.
That's so powerful. And I love things that make us feel powerful and hopeful and have tangible action steps for refined ways to move forward. So I love that. I'm wondering if you could just briefly understand when you talk about energy healing and sort of repairing the cells, repairing the membrane. Can you talk about just from a level of how does that actually work? Like, how does you directing your focus and energy and maybe spirit working as well? How does that work to actually heal your client's body?
I don't know all of the mechanics, and I don't think we're supposed to know. It's way above my pay grade. So I'm not a quantum physicist. I know it uses plasma energy, which is the same as scalar energy. You may have heard of that. Tesla kind of was one of the early guys in scalar energy, which comes from the core of the earth, and it's the same frequency as spirit. So the core of the earth is powered by, I want to say, Taylor, like 2,000 lightning strikes a minute happen around the globe every minute. And it gets grounded into the core of the earth. Well, that frequency is the same as spirit frequency. So I know it uses that frequency, that channel, if you will, like a radio station channel. My favorite analogy of how this works to heal is I get to use stem cell energy a lot to regenerate any body part we need. This stuff is so cool. I have watched it regenerate whole body parts, like a new kidney or a new liver or a new whatever. And it looks like a light amber colored gel, has sparkles in it because it's woo-woo. Gotta have sparkles. And it reminds me of this hair gel when I was a kid in the 60s and 70s called Dippity Doo. You ever heard of Dippity Doo?
No.
Okay, you can look it up. It was a real thing. And so let's say we're going to regenerate somebody's diseased kidney. I'll watch a mold of a kidney. I'll watch this sparkly gel that reminds me of Dippity Doo go into the mold. There'll be a vortex spinning above it. I'll watch the kidney get generated. Pink and healthy kidney get generated. I'll watch the diseased kidney get clamped off, all the plumbing, all the blood valves and, all that jazz. And then I'll watch that diseased kidney get removed. And then I'll watch the new kidney get implanted, get inserted. I'll watch all the plumbing get hooked back up. I'll watch the clamps get removed. And then I'll watch the kidney and it will be working perfectly. And sometimes it shows up on subsequent scans at the doctor's office or the hospital. And I've had doctors over the years call me and say, what the heck are you doing? And how does this stuff work? So if you think about it, if you go back to your fourth grade science lessons, we learned that every cell has a nucleus. Every nucleus is surrounded by cytoplasm, which is a watery gel like Dippity Doo. And our bodies have a centrifugal force in them that spins that causes the cells in our bodies to generate new cells to the tune of billions of them a day, replicate and generate new cells. So I believe what I'm seeing happen in the healings and warp speed is what our bodies are doing on their own all day, every day. And that's just one analogy of things I get to see. I don't really stay in the weeds much trying to figure out how all of it works. I just follow where spirit leads me and allow spirit to work through me and with me to help that person heal themselves. Because I don't need to know how it works. I just know that it works. Other interesting point about the kidney transplant, earlier I would see what happens in the operating room. I would see the donor patient. I'd watch the kidney get harvested from the donor patient. This is all in my head. I'd see the recipient, the diseased kidney get removed, the new kidney, the transplant get put in there. Probably 6 years ago or so, I stopped seeing that and I started seeing the stem cell energy healings. Well, stem cells became part of the zeitgeist. People had heard about stem cells. So it was a frame of reference to which I could identify what this healing was that I was now seeing. So I think that's fascinating too. That's just one example of many.
So interesting. And it's funny. I'm a lot like you in that I'm like, I should be maybe more curious than I am, but I just have a wholehearted trust in spirit that like they're leading me to what I need to know. And I don't ask that many big picture questions. So I totally get that. I also think it's just a beautiful reminder that our body is always healing and that our body always knows what to do and that it's always speaking to us. And I'm wondering, just last little thing here, is there anything, any type of like energy healing intention or visualization or color, like that visualization with the amber light? Could people do some sort of assistance on themselves or help their own body through calling in spirit at home, working on their own energy healing? Like, do you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah, tap into the core of the earth. I know you've seen Star Trek. Beam me up, Scotty. When have you ever seen that in your whole life? Oh my
My
gosh.
dad's gonna kill me because he's the biggest like Trekkie, and I've just never seen it. I'm sorry.
Okay, so they stand on this little disc, and then there's this energy that comes up from their feet up through the top of their head, and it turns them into a hologram, and then they go to another planet. All right. So envision that energy that we talked about a minute ago in the core of the earth coming up through your feet, going up out through the top of your head. And that spirit energy, it's a super high vibration, and that can help energize somebody. And when the cells are in a high vibration, they're happy, they're healthy, they're whole. There's no disease. And disease is always, there's always a fear component. Any kind of emotion that feels bad is always based in fear, 100% of the time. Anger, jealousy, boredom, whatever. You get a cancer diagnosis. I mean, we're human. We're going to be in fear. And then we can raise our vibrational level and say, okay, what do I need to do to help heal my body? Does this feel right? I have a friend who's a Taoist priest, and he says, if you're thinking, you're not knowing. If you're knowing, you're feeling. And feeling is our internal GPS system that lets us know when we're on course.
Yes, I could not agree more.
How does it feel? Do you feel relaxed? Do you feel good? Do you know this is what you're supposed to do? When we're in that, I don't know which way to turn, blah, 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 you're in a low vibration, you're still in fear. Spirit can't guide us when we're in a low vibration. Spirit doesn't communicate on the I feel crappy channels because the vibration's too low. It's like listening to the old time country music stations where they're whining about mama, the truck, and the dog. Oh, my mama took my truck and, my dog was in the back. And yeah, no, you want to be on the happy music station. You want to be on the classical music. I challenge anybody to listen to disco music and not be in a good mood. I grew up with disco music. My son just thinks that's ridiculous. I said, I challenge you. It's just fun. So listen to something upbeat, listen to something fun. When you feel better, then spirit can communicate with you because spirit's a high vibration because it doesn't have the density of a body.
Right. We have to work to raise our vibration so that we can meet them in the middle. For people who are doing that visualization of the earth's core energy coming up through them, what color light do you see that energy as, or can it be any color?
Any color they want. When I see it, it's bright white, yellow, maybe a little bit of a yellowish hue.
As you were describing it, I saw it as white as well. So that makes sense. And I just have to say, like, I don't always see energy or auras around people, but I see so much green around you. And that is
Because
like,
I love you.
yeah, heart chakra vibes. But from like my personal association with green is so connected to healer energy. Yeah, it's just been such a pleasure, Julie. I could honestly pick your brain. I have 500 more questions for you. So thank you so much for being here. How can people find you? And can you let them know about your generous offering that you want to share?
Sure. AskJulieRyan.com. Everything's at Ask Julie Ryan. All my social media stuff's at Ask Julie Ryan. My YouTube channel's Ask Julie Ryan. My weekly podcast. We release 4 shows a week, and one is a call-in show every Thursday night at 8 Eastern, and people call in from all over the world, and we talk to their dead grandma or scan them energetically, or I'll scan their cat. Blessed as somebody is, do a past life thing, get career advice or love life advice or whatever. It's really fun. So everything's at Ask Julie Ryan. And also, if anybody would like a copy of my book, Angelic Attendants, What Really Happens as We Transition from This Life into the Next, as a gift for listening or watching today, just go to julieryangift.com, julieryangift.com, and we'll send you a free digital and audio book download. And it's about how we're surrounded by angels and the spirits of deceased loved ones and pets as we're transitioning. And university-based research shows that 90% of people at the end of their lives see the spirits of deceased loved ones and pets as they're nearing the end of their life. So we're all going to have the situation arise where a loved one will pass. I'm so sorry about your mom. And did you say your father-in-law?
My father-in-law, within a year of in the 1 year anniversary of my mom's passing, like 5 days later, the following year, my father-in-law. Yeah.
Oh, geez. And
Mhm.
it's so hard. It's so heart-wrenching. And this gives a glorious component to that equation. We all know lots of stories about there's lots of information about near-death experiences in the afterlife, but not much about what happens when somebody's actually dying. And I've helped thousands of families, and there's some really heartwarming stories in there too about that. So julieryangift.com, just as a thank you for listening and watching.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the important work that you're doing and for teaching a next generation of medical intuitives as well. It's just so important and it's so needed. And so, yeah, I know our hummingbird community is going to love this episode so much. Thank you again for being here.
Oh, my honor. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to Sitting with Spirit. As always, the part of the podcast where I give the messages from our angels, our past loved ones, take what resonates, leave the rest. It's interesting because as I was tapping into the messages this week, I kind of intuitively feel like there's already so much to hold within this episode. So the angel messages are kind of brief, but one thing that kind of made me laugh was how sometimes our angels and guides use our own emotions and memories as examples of what they're trying to get to with the message. And before we even started recording, I've been feeling this like irritability and frustration. I was talking about it with Claire before we pressed record, and she and I were kind of like shaking out and just like letting the energy move past us, taking deep breaths. But when I sat with our angels and guides, I actually realized that this anger and irritability is part of the message for the week. And that with Mars retrograde, Mars is the planet of like action, sexuality, warrior energy, but it's also the planet of aggression and anger and confrontation. And it feels like this is a powerful week for revisiting old anger that we carry in the heart space. So it feels like a moment to look at like, where can we lighten the load on our heart space a little bit? And I just feel kind of uncomfortable emotions coming up. It's not even that they're that intense. For some of you, it might be, but it's more about like looking into the uncomfortable anger, victim consciousness, frustration, all of the things within that umbrella so we can process it and move forward and get the information from those emotion messengers. It just feels like this week irritability might be heightened, but it's in a similar way that almost like during a full moon, the emotional dial is turned up so that it can be clear to us what we need to release. And so that's what Mars retrograde is doing too. It's turning the dial up on irritability and anger to see where we need more patience, where we need more release, where we can maybe move forward in more efficient ways. So definitely anger, irritability, also maybe looking at our relationship to masculine energy because Mars rules masculine energy as well. So kind of like maybe looking at even old anger or trapped dynamics or things like that within the spectrum of masculine energy, anger, and how we go for what we want. So as soon as here's how you know it's a message and not your own emotion is that as soon as you name it and recognize it, it goes away. So like sometimes in readings, I'll be feeling a headache and I'll be like, what the heck? I didn't have a headache 2 seconds ago. I'm like, oh, it's their headache. It's their message about overthinking. And as soon as I say it, it's gone. So that's just a little tip for you. And yeah, so that leads me to heart chakra upgrades. And I really do feel like that's a big theme this week. And part of the upgrade around the heart chakra is just accepting and listening and processing to the uncomfortable emotions because that concept of uncomfortable emotion keeps coming up. And maybe in the past, we would have said a mantra over it or debated the uncomfortable emotions or tried to talk ourselves out of our reality. But it's actually so powerful to just sit with the unapologetic truth of how you really feel. Because if you won't do that, who will? And then your inner child, like we talked about in this episode, your body will be screaming to get your attention. And so it just feels really important to just have a radical authenticity with the truth of your heart space. And that is going to be one of the best ways you can love yourself, because true self-love isn't showing up how you think you should or trying to be perfect. It's really showing up for yourself authentically through the lowest lows and the highest highs and loving yourself for every single part of it. And then I saw an interesting symbol, which was the symbol of home and family, and it had some shadow over it. And I felt like the shadow was kind of multifaceted, and take the layer that resonates with you, because this is for the collective and it's for a lot of people. So there's a few different like aspects to the shadow. One is that it feels tied to the unknown. I feel like for some people, there's something with like, am I moving? Am I getting a new place? Are we changing locations? Like things like that. It just feels like an actual question mark. But for a lot of us, I feel like there's deeper healing, cycle breaking, and examination of things that have been pushed under the rug. And that's where the shadow comes out in a different way, is like what's hidden. And so I feel like there's something about kind of shining light on the shadows of our inner world. And I feel like part of this heart chakra upgrade is a call to deeper vulnerability, especially for people who are uncomfortable sort of digging a little deeper and not just coasting by in this survival mode place. It's like we've gotten really good at that. And now it's time to peel back a deeper layer to be seen and excavated and worked through. And especially within the context of our relationship to family, to patterns of unhealthy behavior within our family. And then the last layer of this is kind of uncertainty around timing or how, with creating our own family and sort of doing the shadow work that we need to do to create healthier dynamics. So there's a layer of cycle breaking with this image. There's a layer of sort of shadow around, will I have my own family or what will that look like? So this feels very layered to me. So take the aspect of it that resonates with you, but there's just themes of deeper working through inner world, rewiring vulnerability. And again, keep coming back to this like diving headfirst into the discomfort instead of avoiding the discomfort, sort of shining your light directly on it and saying, come at me, because I'm not taking the discomfort as a sign of my shortcomings or my failure. I'm actually just taking it as information so I can better understand and therefore love myself and therefore validate my own experience, because I really understand what I'm feeling. It feels like a powerful week for that, and that is very much tied to Mars retrograde. And what I'm just actually putting together now is that Mars retrograde cycle is going to be in Leo and Cancer. And Leo is the sign of the heart, of biological children and sort of our own ways that we let ourselves shine. And Cancer is the sign of home and family. And I wasn't even thinking about that. So these themes are really coming up to be revisited, especially like the theme of, what did your family do with anger? Did you push it under the rug? Was it not safe to feel emotions? Was it not safe to talk about emotions? Like, where were things kind of secret or pushed down or not dealt with? And now you're perpetuating that cycle with trying to talk yourself out of your own emotions or your own truth of your heart space. This actually leads me to the spirit that we had come through. It was a father energy in spirit. And he seemed like a really interesting man who was doing the best he could, but I feel that he had an anger problem and really struggled with anger. And a part of that was due to the dynamic with his parents, especially his dad. And I got this really interesting feeling that he was on some level aware that he didn't want you to have the same childhood experience that he did. But instead of sort of being warm and open and available, it's almost like he hid himself away or kept distance or tried to love you in a different way, which is really interesting because I got this message in an angel reading not too long ago about a woman that came to me, and her vein of cycle breaking was not being the parent that she thought she should be in response to the trauma of her childhood, but being the parent that her child was asking her to be. So, like, she couldn't understand, I don't get it. I had it so hard, and my parents did all of these things, and I'm doing my best to be this type of parent for her in response to what they were for me. But her angels were like, no, it's not about that response. It's about you showing up for her how she needs you to show up. And so I think this is kind of in a similar vein with this spirit's message of like cycle breaking and showing up in a different way. And so he was responding to how his dad was. So he tried to keep himself a little more stoic or aloof. And it's interesting because his energy feels very layered to me, in that I do feel like he was loving and I do feel like he was close to an extent. But then it feels like he was almost a ticking time bomb internally, and that when things got too intense, he would remove himself, and that you might have perceived that as emotional unavailability, or that you did something wrong, or that you were not lovable enough. I saw a J name with him, like John or Jim. I felt like he could have been more quiet or stoic or to himself, but that there would definitely be moments where it was like warm and loving. I also felt that he died around 65. I felt like he had 2 to 3 kids, and he was especially highlighting the dynamic with the girls. I also felt like there'd be a connection to religion with him, that he would have grew up pretty religious and that he would have maybe found solace in that. And then I also felt like he was with his mom in spirit, and like his mom had her own kind of difficult journey, and that there was a lot of healing on the other side. I felt like he had heart problems. I'm not sure if that's how he passed, but there was definitely pain in the chest. And his message is, I was trying to protect you in the only way I knew how. And sometimes we have to give our parents grace, because their approach to parenting us is a response to what didn't work for them in their childhood. Even if they're not able to give us exactly what we need, they're trying their best for their level of awareness. And what he's saying is, it was never about you. He didn't want to mess you up like he felt he was messed up. And I felt like he actually carried a lot of like shame and self-loathing around his anger. And I just felt like he could get to a boiling point and it would be so much like this implosion instead of an explosion, because he was trying to protect his family. I also feel like, of course, his perspective in the spirit world is completely different than it was here. And he can understand the pain he caused you a lot more now that he's in spirit, and that there's an apology there, and that it's never anything to do with you. Like, even the fact that he was trying to take new energetic strategies was a reflection of his love. It just wasn't the type of love you needed from him. And I feel like there was always this sense of like wishing you could be closer to your dad, or wishing your dad might have been more involved or more warm, something like that. And him just wanting you to know it was never about love, that was always his way of protecting you. And I do have to say, I feel like a few different fathers in spirit are really tacking on to this. And I feel like for some of you, even if you can't take all of the evidence, there will be 2 to 3 postcards for you. And I just want you to know there's quite a few fathers in the spirit world that want this message to be shared. So focus on the message. And if you can take the message and even 2 to 3 pieces of the evidence, know it's for you too. And so I think, again, this ties into the ancestral cycle breaking. And actually, in your own way, your dad was a cycle breaker. And I think that that's really beautiful, because he made a new choice, and it might not have been the choice that you needed in the moment. But I have a lot of grace for our parents who are doing the best they can, because they are cycle breakers, and we don't know the kind of trauma that they came from sometimes. And we have to give them the grace for trying to break a cycle in the best way that they know how. And then we, as the next generation, can break the next layer of the cycle. And so I'm just sending a lot of love to everybody out there, because I think this Mars retrograde cycle is really bringing up a lot and excavating a lot out of the heart space. And it was interesting to me that themes of anger and masculine energy, and then this father in spirit came up. So whatever uncomfortable emotions are coming up, whatever shadows are being sort of revealed, wherever home life stuff feels shadowy or unknown or confusing, just sit with the truth on your heart and do the best that you can moment to moment. It's okay if you don't have all the answers. I think anger is such an important messenger, and sort of similar to how when you get the message, it can go away. I think when we try to run from our anger, self medicate to not feel the anger, blame other people for the anger, the messenger emotion continues and continues. And I think when we just feel the anger and process the anger and locate where the anger is living in our body, we are not our anger. We are not our emotions. So I think that just feeling it to heal it is also another really important message with this Mars retrograde energy.
Yeah, I love that you spoke on that, because that's some healing work I'm trying to do for myself. And there's definitely been a lot of big feelings coming up lately. And I think, we have this instinct of like, I don't want to feel this and I want to fix it or have an answer so I don't have to feel this. I think sometimes the answer is just like giving ourselves that safe space to feel it and being compassionate with ourselves that we feel it, and knowing that family dynamics are tough and our parents were doing the best they could with the pain body that they were dealing with. And so they maybe weren't able to show up for you in ways that you needed, but most likely it was because of what they were coping with. And now, as I see what I'm coping with, I have more empathy for the fact that maybe I didn't receive what I needed in certain moments, and just being gentle with them and myself while I move through it.
Absolutely. I love that. And I think like so many of us in our community think of ourselves as cycle breakers, which is true. But what we might not realize is that the previous generation were cycle breakers too. And they help move the ball forward in their own way. And I think that that's a really beautiful perspective to take. And I know as we're leading into the holidays, there's so much emphasis on wishing our family looked a certain way, or attachment to outcomes with family, or deeper triggers with family. So just be easy on yourself as much as possible. And I just loved this father in spirit because he felt so precious to me. It felt like his heart was really in the right place. And it just felt like he might have even had some undiagnosed mental health stuff. And I'm not sure if anger issues are a technical mental health thing. I'm not sure on that, but it just felt like sometimes his emotions ranged to a place that he couldn't control them. And so for that reason, he was sort of staying away or creating distance. But when I felt into his energy, like there was such a preciousness there, and there was such a love for his family there. And I think there was like a deep, almost self-loathing of like, I wish I could be different, but I can't, so I'll stay away.
That's such a hard thing to think about. And, I think it's also a lesson for us of like, we don't do a service to people when we hide away because we think that what we're feeling or going through is too much. It's like, it serves all of us to be with what we're going through and allow it to show itself, and allow ourselves to find a way to heal it so that we can show up for everyone in our life the way that they want us to be with them. Like our loved ones cherish us, even if in some moments it feels like you're like, oh, it'd be better if I just wasn't here. It's like none of the people that love you feel that way. That's just your pain speaking, and moving through that pain so that you can show up for your loved ones is such a gift to yourself and them.
I agree. And I was seeing this image as you were speaking of this dad looking into his daughter's face when she was very little. And it was just pure adoration and love. And he couldn't bear for that to change. And when we are kids and we idolize our parents and we love them so much, if they have unhealed things within them, it's hard for them to accept that, or it's hard for them to believe they can continue that. And so they might have their own coping mechanisms that never had anything to do with you. And in fact, in their own twisted way, might have been because they love you. They didn't want to disappoint you or let you down or hurt you or sort of disappoint you in terms of your vision of how you saw them.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting how when you're little, your parents are like these entities that aren't people, they're your parents. And then, I think most of us have a realization as we become adults where we're like, oh, they're not gods. They are just other people, like how I'm a person and I might have a kid now. Like they had their own hangups and worries and insecurities. I think that can be really healing to recognize that they didn't need to have all the answers to love you and be there for you. Nobody has all the answers, even our parents.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And the last thing I just feel called to say before we wrap this up is that intense emotions or dark thoughts are not the truth of who you are. It's so easy for us to identify with those feelings, emotions, and thoughts. And our ego wants to filter them into stories about what kind of person we are, but it actually has nothing to do with the truth of who we are. And it's, again, pointing to deeper layers of healing, which are possible for every single person. And so I just want to leave you with that message before we sign off.
That was a helpful message for me because it can be tough inside my brain, and these emotions feel so heavy and they feel like they are me, and they're not. They're not.
They're not. The truth of who you are is pure spirit, pure love, pure potential. And everything else is a lie that our ego tries to create so that we can expect pattern recognition because that's how we need to survive. So don't take that on as the truth of who you are. You are infinite, infinite magic and potential. So have a beautiful rest of your week, my loves. There is more love around you than you could ever understand.
For more information on Taylor and her work, go to angelsandamethyst.com or connect with her on Instagram at angels_and_amethyst. She is the one verified account with this name and will never DM you for a reading. If you have any questions about intuition, spirituality, angels, or anything and everything magical, please email contact@magichourpod.com. We will answer listener questions once a month in our solo episodes. Are you an aligned business owner that would like to advertise to our beautiful hummingbird community? Please email contact@magichourpod.com. Make sure you're subscribing to Magic Hour so you never miss the magic. And don't forget to leave us 5 sparkling star reviews. They help more magical people find the pod. Please screenshot and email your 5-star reviews to contact@magichourpod.com, and we will send you a free downloadable angelic meditation and enter you to win an angel reading with Taylor Page. The next giveaway will happen when we hit 166 5-star reviews.
Thank you for listening to Magic Hour with Taylor Page. Remember, you are magic.